what you want, when you want it, where you want it. This is The Mesh.
Hello and welcome to another episode of I Guess I'll Do It with Pat House, a comedy podcast where I talk to comedians about comedy and all sorts of that kind of stuff. Today's guest is somebody I've never met before, but I would say we're buddies. Comedy is a very small world. We've talked a lot over email and messaging in the past 3 or 4 years. Today, I have comedian and author of Greg Giraldo, A Comedian Story, Matt Balaker. Did I say that right?
You did. Greg Giraldo,
Okay.
comedian story, and as well as my last name, Pat. So extra credit for you.
Oh, thanks. I was like Balaker. I was like, nah, that nobody would emphasize the A like that. I was like saying your name out loud in the car an hour ago.
It's one of those Polish Americanized names, so spin it any way you want. It's fine.
Okay, well, Balaker. Well, it's great to have you here, man. And it's kind of funny. Comedy is such a small world. You and I have been, we've known of each other for like 4 or 5 years now and have corresponded a lot, but this is the first conversation I think we've ever had.
Yeah, I think it was probably 5 years ago. We connected, and then I sent you some drafts of the manuscript for the Giraldo book, and you were nice enough to give feedback. And this was before it was really, I'd been working on it, but it's when I needed some help, and you were there. So thank you.
Oh, dude, thank you for having me be a part of the process. I remember you sent me the first 3 chapters, and I flew through them. Then you sent me the revision of those chapters, and I flew through that. And it was just cool to be a part of it. I mean, you're obviously a huge Greg Giraldo fan, as am I. I was lucky to work with him a handful of times and see him on other occasions around Philly and New York City. So it was a cool read, man. He was the best, and his name's come up on this podcast a lot. And even when most people ask me who my favorite comics are, I still, to this day, throw his name in the top 5, in my top 5.
For sure. And just curious, in what capacity were you opening for him, featuring, or in what was that like?
Hosted my first theater gig I ever hosted. I hosted, I hosted, Birbiglia went on first, Burr was in the middle, and then Giraldo closed it out. That was fucking wild. And then I hosted his last week at Helium in Philadelphia. But every time he was there before at the club performing, I was there in the back hanging out every night watching. And then they actually asked me to host what would be his very last weekend at the Stress Factory. But I was at Helium in Philly with Dave Attell that weekend. So I had to say no, but for a good reason. And sadly and oddly enough, Dave is one of my all-time favorite comics, and I was with him when he got the news that Greg wasn't doing so great. So that was a very weird situation to be with one of my heroes, but nothing good is going on right now.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, rumor has it that Giraldo's death helped put Attell on the straight and narrow. I mean, I can't confirm that at all, but
no, I heard that too.
I've heard it from other people.
Yeah, I think Dave had some other issues, like physical issues too, with the drinking, but I also think that was probably a part of it as well.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, man, huge Greg fan. I still listen to Midlife Vices and laugh my balls off. I mean, there are so many bits on that album that I will listen to like a song, like the same way you.
It's painful now that I'm midlife myself. I wasn't, when I was starting, I was like, should I dye my beard? Are these grays too obvious?
So I want to talk about you and your stand-up in a second, but we already started off on Greg.
Yeah.
So let me get your quick backstory there.
Free load off Giraldo's name anyway, so
well then, I mean, we could have a 3-hour episode on him. So tell me how the book came about.
Sure. Like probably too many comics, I had to get a day job because I went for about a year or so without one, which was great. And then my wife got pregnant, if you can believe that, the second time.
Yeah.
And we moved from it was an expensive part of the country in the Bay Area, but we had a relatively cheap apartment. And then we moved to Orange County, and nothing was cheap. So I needed to get a real job. I mean, I have had a background in finance, so I was fairly employable. And I realized probably my first day in, that job was not a good fit for me, but I was on break, and like most people on breaks, you dick around on Amazon or try to think of some way to pass the time. And I searched for a Greg Giraldo book, just figuring there'd be one. And that was kind of my light bulb.
Wow, simple
moment.
Amazon search.
Yeah, I was like, no one's written a book about Geraldo. Like, what the hell? Because I think of him as like the Kurt Cobain of comedy, and there were definitely books about Kurt Cobain and plenty about
millions.
Nirvana. So I was figured, like, I think you have to be pretty delusional to be a stand-up in general. And I was like, you know what? I wrote in high school. I've written for plenty of things that didn't get picked up. Why don't I just write a book? And so that was the genesis of Greg Giraldo, Comedian Story.
That's really cool. Now so I'm guessing you were a huge Giraldo fan in the first place.
Oh, big time. Yeah. I got really into comedy, kind of performing probably in the early 2000s, call it 2003. But I was a fan as long as I can remember. I remember watching Rodney Dangerfield and Joan Rivers, but it was really Tough Crowd, I guess, in 2002.
Absolutely.
That introduced me to Giraldo. Yeah.
I loved Tough Crowd because that had like comedians that weren't famous yet or like that I idolized at the time. I was obsessed with the Comedy Cellar. So every episode had all the New York City comics. I mean, there was Giraldo, Patrice, Jay Okerson, Laurie Kilmartin, Todd Barry, like everybody that I loved and idolized at the time were on this.
Nick DiPaolo, obviously Patrice, rest in peace. But yeah, I mean, and Colin Quinn himself, I'd seen him a number of times live. I lived in New York briefly, and I'd go to the Comedy Cellar whenever I could, and he was always just great. But then to watch him on TV, it felt like he wasn't trying to be something on TV. He would just take his Comedy Cellar act and adapt it to Tough Crowd.
And then try to lead the comics into an argument. Like he would try to like stir the pot, which I absolutely loved. And
when jokes bombed, which inevitably they do, they left him in. Which I thought was pretty ballsy.
I love that. I actually left that. On my first album, I had a track that bombed really hard, and I kept it because it made me laugh. And I'm actually in the process of editing clips to like put online, like social media and stuff. And I had something fall totally flat in San Fran. I'm like, you know what? I'm posting that. It's actually kind of funny that it did not work.
Well, and then just being able to bounce back from that and not let it ruin your set.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Shows you're a pro. So good job.
Oh, thank you. Now, did you have any interactions with Greg? Did you ever?
I had a couple, and when I say a couple, I mean like two. One was when he did that show with Attell and Dane Cook and Sean Rouse.
The thing in Vegas?
It was the Insomniac tour. It was the one they recorded, Pat, was in Vegas, but I guess they did a practice, or maybe it was around the same time. But I think it was at the Wiltern Theater in Los Angeles. And this is where I lived at the time. Beautiful theater, probably seats a few thousand. Mm-hmm. And Dane Cook was sort of the headliner. Because, I mean, this was sort of the apex of his fame. I want to call it like 2006, around then. But Giraldo just destroyed. Like, I guess technically featured, but he probably did 40 minutes or so. And I think after that, I got to say hi. And then I met him, this was a few months before he passed, at the Irvine Improv. It was after he announced he was separated. Wasn't his best set. And I chatted with him briefly after the show. And I said, I think you're the best that's doing this. I'm a huge fan. Kind of essentially, thank you for giving me so much entertainment over the years. And he was very gracious, but he like wouldn't accept it. He's like, oh no, don't, like, stop. But he was like still polite. It was a very strange interaction.
I had a very similar interaction with him, telling him that I was a huge fan and stuff. But I feel like we're all do that. We're all like that as comedians, like not comparing myself to Greg, but I can't take a compliment either. Like, even when it's just impossible for us.
When people tell me I'm the greatest, I'll believe them, but I don't want to embellish too much.
Yeah, I will say this. This is kind of a weird thing to say, I guess, in a way. But when I hosted that show with Birbiglia, Burr and Giraldo, Burr was in the middle and Giraldo went last, and Greg had a great set, but I mean, Bill blew the fucking roof off in the middle. And like, don't get me wrong, Giraldo did great and had him rolling, but for 35 minutes in the middle, Burr just had them on a different level.
And that's part of the fun of live comedy. I mean, obviously I hold Greg in high regard, but that doesn't mean you're not going to hit a home run every time you're at play. And shit, like Bill Burr's one of the greatest ever too. It's like, there are instances where Bill Burr will be on, maybe his connection will be really good with the audience, and then he'll just destroy. And I think if you're a secure comic, which I don't know if that really exists, you're fine with it. But, I think at Giraldo's stage, it's like, who cares? Like,
exactly.
Bill Burr had a better set. Good for him.
He was so nice. I remember I got to the venue like 2 hours early and I wasn't allowed inside yet, which is so indicative of being the host of a comedy show.
They're like, "Are you a waiter, sir? What are you doing here?"
And like Burr and Geraldo pulled up in like a black SUV with New York plates and got out and shook my hand immediately. And Greg was super nice. And we played foosball that night, and he was playing guitar in the green room, and we were playing pool and drinking beer. And it's just like it's still to this day might actually be my number one favorite memory in comedy. Like occasionally headlining and selling out a club is cool, or having an album do well is cool. But like it was us, me, Geraldo, Burr, Birbiglia, their management, just all hanging out, playing pool, playing foosball, drinking beer, talking about music, and like nothing's cooler than that.
No, and
it's almost like the show was secondary compared to that. Honestly,
you're like you're here for a foosball match.
Absolutely.
Well, when you're newer in comedy too, things like that mean more. You know, it's
absolutely.
The older you get, it becomes more of a job, and a lot of your friends that you did open mics with, you're not palling around like you used to. But when you're pretty, wet behind the ears, and then you get to meet your idols and then perform with them sort of as a peer, that's pretty sweet.
Yeah, it's like that movie Rockstar with Mark Wahlberg and Jennifer Aniston.
Exactly like that.
Cinematic masterpiece.
So so you said you were drinking beers with Geraldo. Was to the point where he could still perform, or was it? Because that was one of the things. Like, I mean, some people are like, yeah, he could drink and not black out, but sometimes people were like, no, it was always a mess. Like,
well, this was after the show, and I don't remember him being fucked up in the least. He may not have even had a beer. For a fact, me and Burr were drinking Amstel Light. I remember that. Maybe Greg didn't even have one, but he was right there.
He was right there. Okay.
Yeah, so I can't recall if he was drinking or not, but I mean, he wasn't messed up in any way, shape, or form that I could tell.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the tragedies, but also something I learned is like, sounds so dumb now, but he didn't seem like an alcoholic or a drug addict. It's like he would pull it together 98% of the time.
Just enough to get through with the show or whatever.
Yeah.
So are you able to talk about this Vice thing at all?
I think so. Yeah. I don't know if I can say what I did on it, but yeah, there's a documentary. I mean, it's public domain that comes
exactly.
out.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, I can't imagine it. Like on the September 27th. It's a series of 10, and one of them is Greg Giraldo, and I'm looking forward to it. I may or may not be on it. I'll put it that way.
Okay, very cool. So it's just like a 1 hour special about him?
Yeah. Did you remember True Hollywood Stories from
Absolutely.
the 90s? It reminds me.
I think I've seen all of them.
It reminds, but I think it's maybe a little less dreary. I saw the first one that Vice aired on what was it, on YouTube. It was with Chris Farley, who's one of my favorite comedic actors.
Absolutely.
And if Giraldo's is like that, I'll be really honored to be a part of it. And I know that they got family members, and I don't want to like ruin it, but they got people that I know hadn't talked a lot about Greg since his passing. And so I think even for huge Giraldo heads like us, we're going to learn something new. And I think that's pretty fun.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm really looking forward to it. Now, have you had any contact with Greg's family? Do you know them?
I've had contact with them. In fact, I mean, I guess I know him through the book, but we're not like, we don't send Christmas cards or things
exactly.
like that. In fact, I really credit Marianne, which was his longest tenured wife, like the mother of his kids, for kind of putting it over the top, because she was like the second or third interview I did. And it was one of those ignorance is bliss situations, Pat, because I just went for it. I was like, oh, how are you? Let's talk. And we ended up talking almost 2 hours. But she was reluctant, apparently, to speak to anyone about it. But I think she quickly realized I wasn't Kitty Kelly or someone trying to write just like salacious tell-all.
Yeah.
And then,
like, you're not TMZ. You wanted something factual, and concrete, because you're a fan and you love the artist and you care. You want to make something nice, and you have to make sure they know that you're not some like random jackass trying to pull one over.
Right. And I think it was either her or one of his old managers said something to the effect of, well, how do I know you're not just going to take this and smear his name? And I think my answer was honest, but helpful. I said, I'm not big enough or powerful enough to ruin anyone's name. Like if if I had all this nasty stuff to say, like, would anyone care? And so I was like, I wouldn't have raised this money and interviewed the people I did, before this, if my intent was just to like say, oh, F you, Greg Giraldo, you didn't book me on that show. I mean, so I think that kind of made him more comfortable. And then when I spoke with Marianne, that sort of opened the floodgates, because it wasn't as if she was an editor of the book where she's like, all right, I'm going to, say this and don't say this. But because she spoke with me, Colin Quinn did, Jim Gaffigan, other people that were other family members. And I think without her going first, I don't know if that would happen.
No, that she probably really opened the floodgates for that and made it legit.
Yeah. And in, I guess it was June of 2019, we did a book party at the Fat Black Pussycat. It's the sister club to the Comedy Cellar.
I remember you invited me. I wasn't able to make it, which means I couldn't make it. I had something to do, but I remember you inviting me to that and being bummed that I could not attend.
It would have been a lot of fun to have you there, but Marianne and her 3 sons showed up, and I was able to talk with all of them. And one of the kids was, he was a young adult, I don't know, maybe 18 or something, but he said, thank you so much for helping preserve my dad's legacy, or something to that effect. And that was like,
oh man,
such a relief, because, I was afraid that, whenever you do something creative, not everyone's going to like it. That's just the cost of doing business. But if his kids would have like really hated it, that would have like cut deep. But the fact that they viewed it as positive and were there to celebrate him in the book, that made me feel really good.
Oh, dude, there's no greater compliment. You're getting that from the man's children. You know what? There's literally no greater compliment in that scenario than having his own son say that to you.
It made me feel like, all right, this is worthwhile. I'm not able to buy yachts from the royalties of it. It took a lot of time, but it was never like this big profit venture for me. It was a passion project, and it was good, because then I'm no longer at that job. I'm doing comedy more full time. But in like the darkest times, it helped give me like a reason to keep doing something.
Yeah,
and I think that's just needed when you're kind of a creative type. You have to have something to be working on.
Yes, exactly. Especially with me too as a stand-up. I want to write a book, and I go back and forth with typing a lot of stuff out, jotting ideas down. But like, I love stand-up more than anything, and I do it often. But sometimes I want to write other shit that's not. I need a break from that. So like a passion project. So I totally get that. Did you have? No, I know this is this is an impossible question. So I'm just going to phrase it like that.
My favorite.
Did you have a favorite Greg bit or two? I won't hold you to just one, but what were some of the Giraldo bits that really do it for you?
Yes, there was one, there's probably 3 or 4, but one that jumps
Name
out.
Them all.
When it says like, no one has about comparing dogs and children, because no one has a dog because they're too drunk to pull out. I have 2 kids now, and I don't have any dogs, so I think that's particularly funny. or the one where it says like, if everyone has high self-esteem, who's going to dance at the strip clubs? Like, that's one that kind of I think will withstand the test of time. And then there's the other one, like the Civil War letters bit.
Oh my god!
That's like
it is hot in the desert.
Yeah.
Oh man, there's so many.
I think that'll always be funny. I think in 200 years, people read that and laugh. How about you? Are there any that
I like you, there's a bunch. I know both of his albums word for word, and I've worked with them a couple times. The bit about female pilots always gets me.
This is a big fancy piece of equipment.
just the way he like delivers that joke. It's his tone, it's his delivery when he says every man and woman on that plane went, what the fuck? like every syllable of that sentence is enunciated perfectly, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Even just like I know it's one of his signature bits, but like, yo, Monica, you got AIDS. He sells that perfectly too. Like, he really imitates the guy yelling across the tracks. And then, like, he was super smart. So he mentions the AIDS thing, then brings it back to Michael Moore. That Michael Moore is right. We have the worst healthcare system. So, like, that's one thing I loved about Greg across the board, man. I put this on Facebook years ago in like a Facebook eulogy where I shared a picture. Like, Greg would literally have jokes about like a homeless man jerking off in the subway, and then the next bit he was talking about like foreign policy or like the economy in Spain.
Yeah,
like he was obviously had a law degree. He was Ivy League educated, but he did like dirty, which I love, like dirty comedy club shit, but also literally did shit I didn't comprehend because I don't know about European economy or the labor laws in South America, but he does. And he would do these sets that were like just fucking not all over the place in a scattered brain way, but just like he was so smart, but also he was a dick joke comic too. And I love the whole picture of his set.
There's I'm blanking on his name, unfortunately. Really nice guy. He runs, I think it's Last Things First podcast. He's a comedy journalist. It'll come to me soon. But
yeah, I know the name of that podcast, but I definitely don't know the name.
Very, very nice guy. So if you're listening, shout outs to him. But he covered Geraldo at a Arizona gig years ago, and he said in his article he was the smartest man in the room without talking down to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that says a lot. It's like, it's easy for smart people like that to kind of come off as condescending or like not include people in the joke. But he had a way of being like Ivy League and blue collar, and it worked.
It totally worked. And he would also like, I don't want to use the phrase dumb it down, but like whenever he would talk about something that most people in the room would not know about, he worded it in such a way to where he explained it properly and made you not feel like an idiot. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
and it was Sean McCarthy. That's the journalist, Sean McCarthy.
Oh, so he used to run, I don't know if he still runs it. The comic blog. And website. Yeah. So here's a cool memory I just got to witness one time. Like when you go to a comedy show, right, and the comedians do their act, the crowd loves it. But sometimes when something off the cuff happens or the show goes awry, it can go one of two ways. It could be really exciting or it can just derail the whole show. This was before I ever even worked with Greg. Some guy is heckling from the back, like, do the bitches bit. From the the music video.
Like bitches are so much better than regular women.
Yes, bitches don't even have mothers.
Yeah.
So that was his signature bit, probably in the early 2000s, mid 2000s. And so Greg's doing all new material, and some guy's like, bitches, and Greg's like, yeah, I'm tired of doing that bit. It's done. So Greg goes, you want to do the bit? And the guy's like, yeah. So Greg calls the guy up from the stage, and this man in the crowd tries to do his bitches bit. Does it poorly, gets a couple of lines, but the crowd was loving it. Greg was sitting on the stool laughing his balls off, and it was such a cool moment. Like truly a once in a lifetime thing. And I was really cool that I got to catch that. And it was cool that Greg's just like, yeah, fucking, you want to do it? Come on up. And the guy did.
He's like, I could use a breather myself. I mean, that's the beauty of live comedy. I mean, I think it's fun to watch Netflix specials or HBO or whatever, but it's best served live, in my opinion.
Oh, absolutely.
You get moments like that you're never going to get on television.
And they're so rare that only may happen one out of every 100 shows. You never know. That's just, I happen to be in the room. That guy happened to be there, and that guy, like, everything came together for that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And you'd worked with Greg a few times. Were there ever instances, Pat, where he sort of split the room on a joke and then won him back, or just didn't seem to care?
Kind of not seem to care, but the last time I worked with him, it was right before Midlife Vices. He was basically running that hour, and there was no dividing. He was murdering every single show. There wasn't a dud in the bunch. I was excited as the host because I know they're here to see Greg, but he brings out killer fans, so like they know they're on board. For the whole show is going to be awesome, you know? So I don't remember anything with him dividing the crowd or losing the crowd. All my memories of seeing him in clubs were just him absolutely destroying.
Yeah, because there were instances where he would say kind of a controversial bit, but 2 minutes later they'd be on his side. And I'm trying to think of, I mean, maybe Burr's an example. I just don't see a lot of that today. Well, where it's like you really don't care if I mean, usually you don't care, but it's like what is the old saying? The key to failure is trying to please everyone, and I think that's true in comedy. And the best comics everyone's not going to like that joke, and he seemed to like not care. But then he had a wide enough range of material that give it 90 seconds or a few minutes, and someone who was booing him on one bit is now going to be like giving him a standing ovation on another.
Yeah, isn't that's weird of comedy in general, where like especially from the crowds that judge you joke to joke, like, all right, all right, this
I liked
did
you
not
14
do well.
seconds ago, Pat, but now
you
lost all
know, and it's like I would rather flat out bomb than just have a set where I can't gauge them because one joke does great, the next one bombs. This joke does okay, this joke does great, the next 3 jokes bomb. It's like I can't figure you out. So I'd rather just have a good set or fucking eat it and not be on this roller coaster of emotions trying to figure out what's happening.
Yeah, if you eat it, you can chalk it up to the audience not liking you or being on a different page. But if they like 40% of your jokes, you're like, well, I might actually be the problem.
So speaking of your jokes being the problem, let's get into you now.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Yeah.
How did you, so I know nothing about your backstory. How did you find yourself doing stand-up? You said you watched Rodney Dangerfield and you mentioned Joan Rivers earlier. I was watching all the stand-up as a young kid as well. You were just attracted to it. How'd you find your way in?
It was on a dare.
I've heard that before on this podcast too. Yeah. That's hilarious.
I guess it was, kind of, I guess I'll do it kind of thing. I was
perfect. Thank you for referencing the name of the podcast.
Like, subscribe, and share, folks. I was interning for Conan O'Brien, or as part on the late night, and it was, I guess, December, and us interns were going to leave, and so most of the people there were comedy nerds. Why else would you join? And
absolutely.
My friend Seth and I went to, I think it was like Hamburger Harry's. It was an open mic in Times Square, and I went there. Started at like 11 or midnight, and it was pretty depressing. Like it was my first exposure to open mic comedy, and we just thought like, wow, that kind of sucked, but like it wasn't what I thought. And then my friend's like, all right, we'll make a pact. Let's do it. And I just gotten dumped by like this girl, I was 19 or something, or, so in love, and
I was 19 as well.
Or maybe, I had all this angst, maybe 21. I don't remember. I was young. And so I had like venom, I had stuff to like riff off of. And we used that week to just write stuff. And then I did it. And then the next week I put my name in the hat, and it was one of those random draws, or so I thought. And Seth never showed, and I was like, that pussy. Like I would have died before not doing it. Like I didn't want to like be also like back out. So I waited like an hour and a half. I was finally called. So I was the last one. So my first gig, Pat, I was headlining, and it was okay. Like I had material that few people laughed, but I didn't die. And the booker is like, oh, it was good. Like, what other shows do you do around here? The booker, the lady running the
yeah, exactly.
And I was like, that was my first one. And she's like, oh, really? And she could have just been being nice, but I was like, that like, oh, I wasn't.
Oh, I did
that was my intro. And 21 years later, still hoping to get back at the same place because it's been downhill since.
So were you hooked from that one set? Were you like?
I was. I mean, I think it wasn't like, oh, this euphoric high but it was more like I'm kind of a pussy about heights, and so I can't imagine skydiving, but it felt like a little bit like my friends who went skydiving. They're like, well, it wasn't as bad as I thought. And then from that point, I went back to Los Angeles. I was a college student. And then I enrolled at the Groundlings. And I always wanted to do stand-up again. And I think I did it like 6 months later. But it was really like a year or two after that I would work on crafting jokes, going up to open mics every night, bombing. Some would do well. And then going from there. But there was you've probably come close to perfection on stage. I haven't. But I think
that's very kind of you to say. But
it's that fake thrill news. Like, can I have this brilliant joke, or can I have a new 5 minutes, or now it's can I have a new hour? You just build each year. And I think it's kind of like an addiction, or maybe a vocation is a better
totally.
way of it's like, I don't recommend it. Like, I think in a lot of ways I'd be a better person without it. Like I'd be a more present husband and stuff like that. But I think it's just kind of part of who I am. And if I try to deny it, I'm more miserable than if I just
depriving
admit,
yourself. Yes.
Right.
I said it before a million times. Like, it's literally like, just also how we're wired. Like, I'll be going about my day. I'll be buying something at CVS and I'll notice like a man or woman giving the cashier a hard time and it stands out to me and I get angry and I'm like, oh, that was kind of funny. It's literally how like I'm wired. We see stuff, and for me, my natural inclination is to be angry or annoyed for a few minutes and then I find it funny. But I mean, we find the funny in everything, like unintentionally. Some people are scientists. They're good with numbers and seeing technical shit. Like, I see a bitch at CVS and I'm like, I know I'm going to be talking about it in 2 days.
I think you hit the nail on the head. It's like, I think a lot of writing, especially for stand-up, is more about listening than sitting down with a pen and paper or a keyboard. It's more like you're saying, if there's some lady bitching at CVS, are you attuned to that? And are you able to personalize it? So when you tell it on stage, it's coming from your voice, not a reporter.
Yeah. And sometimes, like, with my act is like 98%, 100, like true stories now. Like, I don't really have too many jokes anymore. But I mean, for joke structure, like, in that situation, I would try to like tell what happened when I saw with the cashier and the woman at CVS. But if it's not working, then I'll have to put myself as the customer and just bend the truth a little bit. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, it still happened, but I mean,
you have to take some license because
absolutely. And all comics exaggerate too.
Yeah.
If I tell a story, 90% of it is true, but the other 10% is just either embellished for the story or it's so ridiculous and goofy, it's a punchline because it's ridiculous,
Yeah, it's amazing how many things happened that day.
Oh, I am so cognizant of that on stage. It's not even funny. I was walking down the street today, or just yesterday, my wife and I were out to dinner. I'm like, it drives me nuts. But on the flip side, I'm such a hypocrite because I will find myself saying recently a lot on stage.
Yeah.
I was at Lenscrafters recently.
Recently.
I was in first class recently. I'm like, Jesus Christ, this joke's 2 years old. So for as much as as like today and yesterday stand out in the premise, I'm like the recently guy.
Well, I think that shows respect for the audience, because if you're sitting in the crowd and someone's like, oh yeah, 14 and a half years ago, you're not as invested in it as if they said recently or this morning. So I think, you're giving respect where it's due.
I want to see a comic like fuck that up. Be like, recently I was like voting for Dukakis or something, and be like, wow, you still, wow.
So Paul Songus, he's my guy.
Yeah.
So what motivated you to get on stage and sling jokes?
I mean, the bare bones answer, I loved watching stand up from when I was a kid. My dad would watch it. I would watch it. When I was in college, I started seeing live shows. In high school, I watched Comedy Central stand up all the time. The Comedy Central Half Hour Presents. And then I started seeing live comedy. I went to a show at the Tower Theater in Philadelphia where Birbiglia hosted, again, mentioning him. I wasn't on this show. Birbiglia hosted, Mitch Hedberg was the middle, and Dave Attell and Louis Black co-headlined.
Oh, wow.
And I sat in the front row of the balcony, and I swear to God, my arm hair is going to stand up when I say this. That was the night I was like, you're trying this. You are absolutely trying this. You just have to try it. Because I had a notebook with some stuff written in it. And shortly after that show, I went and did my first open mic, and I'm one of those lunatics that has not stopped since day one, minus COVID. Yeah. I did my first open mic in October of 2004 on a Wednesday, and then I proceeded to go every single Wednesday for the next 3 years.
I think that consistency is important, because the first mark is just doing it, and then it's like, all right, can you make your friends laugh? Which inevitably they'll be there to support you, and then can you make strangers laugh? And then can you create new jokes to make people that aren't into you not hate you? So there's always a new challenge.
Oh, there's always a challenge. There is always a challenge. But yeah, it was as simple as that. And then a crazy caveat to that story is that was at the Tower Theater in Upper Darby. to this night one of the best comedy shows I've ever seen. Literally a life-changing night. Absolutely life-changing night. And then about 11 years after that, almost to the day, I opened for Sebastian Maniscalco at the Tower Theater. So I got to do a set in my hometown in front of about 3,500 people on that exact stage where my life changed. So,
so did you have friends from your neighborhood there, or
I did.
what?
I had a lot of people. I mean, Sebastian Maniscalco's huge around here, so I also coincidentally have a lot of friends and family that are fans of his. But I did have a couple friends there to see me, and man, it was wild to stand on that stage. I mean, I saw the Foo Fighters there. I've seen a lot of my favorite bands there as well, and now I'm on that stage, and like I'm on the giant video screen behind me. I did a couple local jokes I would never do in a comedy club, but because I was performing at a theater at home, I had to, and it was just fucking murdering. And like, you know, as comedians, we're so like in our heads and we're at work and we got to say the words and we're going through the motions. Like I made sure to like stop, let them laugh and take it all in. Cause that was truly could be a once in a lifetime thing for me to ever be on that stage again.
Right.
So I'm glad that that night happened. And then I'm glad that I actually took the time to stop and enjoy it instead of just panicking and going through the motions. You know what I mean?
Right. So now that you've been doing it a while, how has your outlook changed from the first few times you did it?
Well, the first two times I did it, I just wanted to get laughs out of the audience. But now I'm like, how much money am I going to make doing this in October? So, you know, the business side comes into it, but just from the creative side, the more fun side, I used to just tell jokes and then really short stories, like jokes that were a couple jokes stringed together to make a story. But now I want to get more into storytelling, period. I have a couple bits that are like 4 to 6 minutes long. And like, I really love funny stories, not like Bill Cosby, 30 minutes per story kind of thing, but like, I think I've gotten better. Well, I hope I've gotten better in the past 18 years, but I want to, you know, keep developing the skill set to be, I don't want to be like pinned to a storyteller, but like Segura is a perfect example, man. Just just like 5 to 7 minutes on all these chunks. I fucking love that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Like it's funny you mentioned Sebastian. I remember in Los Angeles, I ran a show and started in 2006. It went 12 years. And Sebastian was like a pretty well-known LA comic, but he was still a waiter. And he was still like, like scrambling to get spots. And I mean, he was probably a paid regular at the Comedy Store. But at the time, the Comedy Store kind of sucked. Like for a few years, it was really just like kind of dank. And then like fast forward a few years and he's with you, you know, selling out stadiums. So it was just one of these things like, it's trite, but dreams come true. You know, like he was, but it's also strange. Like, why was it him and not some other? You know, I mean, not that this isn't a knock on him. I mean,
of course,
but I mean, there's a lot of really great comedians, and I remember watching shows with him, and there'd be like Brent Ernst was up. I mean, Sam Tripoli. Like, there are these really hilarious comics. Why is it one just like starts this ascent? I mean, I don't know if it's worth speculating, but that's.
Yeah,
I think about.
You always say, is it luck? Is someone just better at the business side? Like, was the right person at the right show at the right time? You know, Jay Okerson told me 15 years ago that success happens at different rates and in different ways. Because Jay started out with Kevin Hart, and like,
say no more,
dude. You don't know. But one of the coolest things I love about the position I'm in now, or have been in throughout my career, is I have opened for Sebastian and Segura on their rise from not selling out comedy clubs to theaters. And it's pretty cool to have been alongside that. Like, Sebastian and I met randomly. I was the host. He was the headliner. And he wasn't famous yet, but the shows were decent. But then the next time he came to Philly, all the shows were sold out. Next time back in Philly, all the shows are sold out, but they add to. Next time in Philly, he's doing the theater. But I remember opening for him in rooms that were only half full. It's so cool to just watch that from the sidelines.
Oh yeah,
I mean, don't get me wrong. I want to be, on the field in contention with this game. But I mean, I've seen it in a handful of buddies and comics now that I've toured with, and it's really crazy to see clubs to theaters to with Sebastian now, literally like arenas, like
Oh,
4 nights at Madison Square Garden.
It's a trip, and like there's not a lot of pyrotechnics. It's still just the same
Bare bones
thing you would do at a bar. Like I think maybe that's how we got in touch, because I knew Christina before she married Christina Pazitsky, before she married Tom, and then Tom started doing my show at Red Rock, and he became a regular. And it's like to see him now, and it's funny because I sort of just, when I became a parent, I don't watch a lot of outside comedy. Like, I mean, I opened for him in San Jose, and then I saw him at this movie thing my brother did, and then like I checked something out, and he's like selling out a stadium for like a week or something like that. And I just like really didn't know. And then I was so like pumped for him because he's still like kind of the same dude. But one thing that stuck out, even like from 12 years ago, is his batting average was ridiculously high. That's not to say like every new bit he tried succeeded, but he'd come to a show and do like a different 8 minutes every month or so, and like 60% of it was really good. You know, I mean, he just had this knack. Like, so I mean, he can build hours faster than, you know, most of us could build 10 minutes. Like he just, you know, I mean, I'm sure it's a learned skill, and he's got the muscle, but I mean, it just, that really stuck out with him. Like he just didn't fail a lot. Like a lot of his stuff just hit, like
just murders.
Yeah. So good for you.
Thanks. I mean, just trying. All right, man, we're going to wind down here in a second. Dude, thank you for being here. What else do you want to plug at the end? Give everybody your socials, because I want to, we'll do all sorts of promo for it, and I'll make sure, you know, we get the Geraldo fans on here as well, because as a Geraldo fan, this is the conversation I want to hear.
Twitter is Matty B Game, MattyBGame, but all the other social handles is at Greg Geraldo Book. So check out the book, check out the website, check out hopefully a movie coming out, which I'd love to discuss in the future. But you know,
dude, absolutely.
I'm teasing it right now. There's a great script out there. So thank you. And the Matt Balaker podcast. I punched it up, but no, it's adapted from the book. But
very cool.
We can discuss that on mine or a future. I guess I'll do it show.
Absolutely, dude. Well, thank you so much for being here, man. Greg was clearly monumental to both of us. I'm glad we got the chance to talk about him, and thank you for being the man to write the book. Thank you for doing that, because I read it as a buddy and as a fan. So I'm always looking right at it. So thank you, man. We'll be in touch soon. I guess I'll do it with Pat House. Thank you for listening.
You've been listening to The Mesh, an online media network of shows and programs ranging from business to arts, sports to entertainment, music to community. All programs are available on the website as well as through iTunes and YouTube. Check us out online at themesh.tv. Discover other network shows and give us feedback on what you just heard.